Welcome, everyone. This is Tabitha Lord from Book Club Babble, and today I am so pleased to welcome Cheryl Bostrom to the show today. And she just released her first fiction novel titled Sugarbirds. I have the beautiful book right here, and I have to say I was thrilled to read it, and even more thrilled to have her today because I truly loved the book. And I don't say that lightly. It takes a lot for me to say I really loved the book, but it was the writing. Not only was the writing beautiful, but the story had just enough suspense, just exactly the right voice for a teen and a young girl, and just this beautiful sense of place. And so it was an absolute pleasure to read this book, and I am so excited to be able to talk to you about it today, Cheryl. So welcome to Book Club Babble. Welcome to the Author's Cut. And just so our listeners know that Cheryl's written interview will be available probably in another week on the site. So you'll get some more insight and details into her writing career and her life. If you are interested, you can check it out at bookclubbabble.com. All right, Cheryl, welcome again, and thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? Because it's not as a writer per se of fiction. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did before, how you got from there to here, and a little of the journey along the way?
Well, good morning, Tabitha, and I'm really glad to be here. Thanks. Yes, I have a master's degree in English from Washington State and have spent most of my life helping other people write. I did write 2 books about 20 years ago that were nonfiction. But then I turned 60 and I thought, I've had these stories in me forever. And then I had a granddaughter born and I wanted to write for her. So I just dove in. I learned everything I could, and I got a chance to work with some terrific editors who were basically like another one-on-one MFA, one in particular. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time helping people, editing their work, working with students and others as they put out their books, and teaching others how to write. So yeah.
So talk a little bit about, I did read that you've in your bio that you have some things published with magazines and such, and that you did write 2 nonfiction stories. So how is it different when you're trying to construct a fiction story? Like, what are the joys and challenges of jumping from one to another? Because people always used to say to me when I was younger, write a book already, you're such a good writer. And I would try to explain, well, there's a difference between being a technically good writer that could write an essay, bring a story together, do an interview, and writing a book, and completing a character arc and a story arc. And I didn't believe I could do it until I turned 40, actually. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I always love to hear people's stories of what finally, the switch flipped and you did it.
The switch flipped. It was terrifying. And I think I can remember telling my family when I was 10 years old that I wanted to write a novel. I remember in college, talking it up, but you and I were talking earlier about imposter syndrome. and wondering if I could do it. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And so when I started this process and I was writing sketches for these characters and for an online fiction class, I came up with this sketch about a little girl and a fire. And both the class instructor and the participants in the class wrote to me privately, commented online that they really wanted to hear what was going to happen with this girl. So I very tentatively just stepped into that. And then this marvelous community of people came around me as I just kept taking the next step and the next step to learn what I could. But it's a huge learning curve. Like I said, I've taught English. I taught English at the high school level for many years, and I just learned so much. And I think that's the beauty of writing in this time right now, because we've got so many resources available to us. There's so many places we can learn how to do it. And
there are, absolutely. Yeah.
But I rewrote in ways that I've never thought I would rewrite, because fiction's different in that you've got not only the linear storyline, but you've got all these thematic layers. And I write literary fiction, so all these thematic layers and the character arc and the voice and the pacing and all of that to hold a reader.
Right. And it's one of those things that when I tell new writers, I'm like, just write the story to start. And
Mhm.
then you can come back and attend to those pieces that aren't quite there, but get the story out first. And how did you feel when you finally got that first draft done?
I took pictures. I had the manuscript. I printed the manuscript out and I just took pictures of it from all angles. And I go, I have a story.
You have the story.
I was just incredulous, and
Yeah.
so grateful for everybody who helped me along the way.
Now your book baby just won some awards, did it not? And
It did.
that has to be so gratifying, right? For
Oh,
your
it was
first one. So
thrilling.
tell us about that. Tell us a little bit about your awards, and then we'll dive into some more about the book.
Well, it was it was submitted to these awards as an ARC. So I didn't have any idea even that it was in the running. And then over the last week and a half, the book released August 3rd, but over the last week and a half, I learned that it won the 2021 American Fiction Awards in 3 categories: in literary fiction and in general fiction and in cross-genre fiction. And then it was a finalist in the religious fiction category. And then a couple days ago, I learned that it won a silver medal in Reader's Favorite Awards in inspirational fiction.
That's fabulous. Congratulations. And you've earned every one of those awards. Let me just say, it's a beautiful book. I'll say it again. It's a beautiful book. So let's talk about the book a little bit. You have 2 main characters, Celia and Aggie. Tell us a little bit about each one. And then I want to ask the question that I do have in the written interview as well. You made an interesting choice that I've made too as a writer to put one character in the first person. So you really hear that I perspective, and another in the third. And so let's give us a little sketch of Celia and Aggie, because that'll help people understand a little bit about the book and draw them in a little, and just talk about that one choice from a writing craft perspective.
Okay. The key protagonist is Aggie, who's a 10-year-old girl who her mother is suffering from mental illness, and they're having quite a bit of conflict. And this little girl accidentally lights her home on fire, and it burns to the ground, and her parents are hauled out, and she thinks she's killed them. Her dad's a naturalist too. He's an arborist, and they have an heirloom seed company. So he's taught his daughter a lot about the woods. And as an antidote to her heartbreak over her mother's mental illness, he teaches her to climb trees in the forest and sketch these nests of wild birds. So she's really familiar with the natural world. After she lights this fire, she wants to hide in the forest because that's where she thinks her only friends are. So she spends a month in this forest. And I wrote her in third person because she's by herself most of the time. And she's got stuff going on in her head, but a lot of it is the reader observing her interaction with the natural world and her questioning of what her suffering means and whether she's hated or not. And she does a lot of grappling with whether, who's going to love her? What do you do with all this guilt and sadness? So that's Aggie. And then 16-year-old Celia's dad is really concerned about this friend that she's hanging out with. And so when he's an exploration geologist for an oil company. And so when he has to take a job in Brazil, he tricks Celia into coming to her grandmother's farm in Northwest Washington. And she's close to her grandmother. They see each other several times a year, and she helps her rehabilitate wild birds. But she's furious. But she's also from Houston. She's a teenager, and she's just got this great voice. And so to write her in first person evolved, because I was going to write her in third person too, but she didn't come alive for me. And when I switched to first person, that girl started talking. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it really works. And I think from that perspective of, Aggie spends so much time in the natural world, and to be able to sort of see that from almost the bird's eye view, that sense of place. I mentioned this in some of the writing that we did back and forth, but it is so beautifully drawn. You feel like you're right in there without it being info dumpy, like, I write in science fiction, and one of the things we have to be aware of is like, we just create these giant worlds and we want to tell you every detail, and nobody really cares except for me, so readers are going to flip the page, and yet you've put it in such a, an interactive way when she's in the den of the, whatever the cat, and she's hiding in there, and you feel this this stress as she can hear the animal, and then so you're experiencing the natural world through her experiences, and it's just beautifully done. And you must have spent a lot of time out in the natural world yourself to have it so well so well drawn. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do as you're a photographer, right?
Yeah, I do a lot of photography, and I was raised on the Olympic Peninsula, in the 50s and 60s, and that was pretty wild country. And I was raised with a lot of trauma. And so the natural world was a beautiful escape for me and my siblings. I mean, we were kind of feral kids in a way. And now I live on an acreage with woods and fields and ponds, and we've got coyote dens on our place. We've got cougars moving through our property. It's all very familiar to me, and it's all very nourishing. And when our granddaughter was born, I wanted to be able to capture this world for her, and the healing in it, and the reality of it. But when you talk about info dumps, I did throw away dozens of pages when I was trying to give too much information, right? Because it has to happen organically in the story for readers to experience it and not get pulled out of the story.
Well, you did a great job with your editing, because it really felt like just enough. You could picture it, imagine it, smell it, taste it, like you were there with her, but at the same time, it wasn't like just, okay, that's enough. Okay, enough, another drink. Okay. No, it wasn't like that. So you did a wonderful job, and your editing team and your, beta readers or whoever advised, and you got it right, let me say. So the coming of age angst and the trauma and the healing, there's some pretty powerful themes that you have in this story. The one of them obviously is Aggie, who thinks that she's, killed her parents and is dealing with this terrible guilt, as she's also already a bit traumatized by her mom's mental illness, and she's very close to her brother, but he's not exactly a great communicator. So there's that piece threading through, and then you have, as you said, Celia, who's has to learn to forgive her dad's decision making, and then it becomes involved with another dangerous person while she's there. But there's these themes of trust and healing and growing up. And I just love how you've woven it all together. What did you have a kernel that you wanted to start out with and it grew from there? Or did it sort of like piece together as you went along in terms of theme?
Well, it's funny because I think I have to write a story to know it. And even as I'm still learning things about layers in this book, but I wanted to portray the fact that there are a variety of options on how we deal with suffering. If you look at these four, and particularly in the world right now, people are hurting, and they're asking questions about the character of God in this. And yet in this story, we've got four characters who deal with their suffering in really different ways. Cabot chooses to act like a victim. He's blaming. Celia gets angry and retaliatory over her pain. Aggie's trying to make sense of God in all of this, because her dad has taught her a lot about how to notice God and his healing and his character in the natural world. But she just doesn't see it. She doesn't get it when something this awful has happened, and a tragedy that's that terrible. And then Burnaby, who's on the spectrum and extremely literal, actually almost tries to be God in his pain, because he experiences he experiences the deaths of these birds and other deaths and other losses in the story. And so he tries to resurrect life into these bones that he puts back together. And all of them are grappling with their hungers, and they're universal hungers for us, for safety or forgiveness, or what do we do with a guilt that's so deep and so horrible that we don't think we can ever be loved again. And we're all looking for that love and belovedness. So in the natural world, as a child, this was really meaningful to me because I was always drawn to being out in nature. But I remember when that Exxon Valdez cracked up in Alaska, and my granddad, I was beside myself. I thought that beautiful country's wrecked. And my granddad was an Alaska pioneer, and I traveled that inside passage with him a number of times. And so I had the opportunity to go into some of these really wild areas. But when I heard about that wreck, he said to me, he says, Cheryl, it'll heal. And he said, healing is built into the natural world. And so I started watching for that. And even though there's all this survival of the fittest, and there's a lot of hard stuff that happens even in nature, I started seeing it. I mean, even in the cycling of the seasons and this renewal of life. And so for me, it was just huge. So I wanted to have these kids have opportunities to see this, and all the characters actually, to see this and not see this, because there are some who are completely blind to it in the story. And so, yeah, so they're all showing that.
Yeah. And I think in the end, and I don't want to give away spoilers, but there is real, it's not a happy ending. Not everything like certainly there's a tragedy there that does occur. It just stop. I don't want to give it away, but there's also real healing and the power of love and the power of forgiveness and understanding is there. And that's the overwhelmingly satisfying message I got out of the book. Was by the time I got to the end, my faith in humanity was, I don't want to say restored. It wasn't good, but I was like, yes, this is how I wanted to feel when this story ended. And I did. And I just love when you can have such an exploration of all of these different traumas and thematically difficult things, and come out at the end and still feel hopeful. That the world is still a beautiful place, and people for the most part can love one another and forgive one another, and it can be okay. And I love that. That's just, it was beautiful. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about going back to your two main characters. The voice for each is so good, and there are two different age groups. It's 10. So essentially you were writing a middle grade and a young adult at the same time. You had an adult theme and a very literary telling with a dollop of suspense. Right. So I mean, obviously I think you would classify it as literary, but it has elements that are really well done of all these other pieces. So for voice, with trying to get the right Celia and Aggie voice, what did you call upon for that? Obviously, when I'm writing younger characters, I'm like, I'm not young anymore, but I have children, or I have, I've been a teacher. So where did you look to find that authenticity for those two characters?
Well, we're always all the ages we've ever been.
That is true.
So I still have some of that 10-year-old in me, and I have the 16-year-old memory of that in me too. But I had editors. See, I first started even thinking that I was going to write this as YA, but I had so many people say it's not YA. It's an adult novel. The themes are layered. But I knew that I needed to. I knew that I needed a girl whose rationale would be skewed enough that she would believe she was going to go to jail or go to juvie if they caught her. And so everybody who's looking for this girl is looking to bring her home and show her how beloved she is, but she doesn't,
right. She thinks they're going to bring her to jail. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she has to be 10, right? Even though I had editors and agents telling me she's got to be 13 for that genre. She can't be 10, but she had to be 10. So I have a 10-year-old girl who lives across the street from us she does mutton busting, or she did at the time mutton busting, and she's out riding her quad around and and she and I are good friends, and she comes over, she likes to write, and she'll sit with me and write. And so we did a lot of talking. And so I just kind of re-entered her experience. And then Celia, I worked with so many high school kids, and I raised a couple of high school kids myself. And we had, a lot of kids around. So that was familiar.
Yeah, their voices are just beautiful and so spot on, and again, of course, we have been all those ages. I love that. I love how you said that. But really getting the details right of that mindset at that age, it seems so far away. And yet when I was reading Aggie, it was just what you said. Of course she's 10. Of course she thinks that everyone is out to get her and they're going to drag her to jail, and the guilt. And it just evoked the exact perfect moment in childhood, memory.
Another thing too is how kids take the things that we as adults tell them, and all the adults in this story are human. They failed these kids, they love them intensely, but they've still failed them. But how kids will take things that adults give them or say to them and go take a hard left or a hard right with it.
Right.
And
yeah. It was so are you going to keep on writing fiction, do you think?
Oh yeah, it's way more fun. And I've started a sequel, and it's got Celia and Burnaby in it 20 years later. And there's some other young people in there, and it's set in a different part of Washington where my husband and I lived when we were in graduate.
I'm so excited, because I have to say I love Burnaby too. He was probably one of my favorites. I just thought he was so, when people that are on the spectrum, that is there, but that deep capacity for love is in there. It's just how they chunk out their experience of the world and need to organize it, or like what they can take in and what comes back out. And I just loved him. I'd love to see him as a real adult in 20 years.
Good.
So yay.
Well, I wanted Burnaby too I wanted him to be heroic, not in spite of his autistic traits, but because of them. And he gives us a whole different slant on the world as readers. And he does that for Celia too, and really causes her to rethink her whole perspective on relationship.
Yeah, he's a great character. So yay that he comes back. Well, I just want to thank you. We're about at our half-hour mark. So I want to thank you for being here today. And again, I am so thrilled that I got a chance to talk to you about your book. Congratulations on a really wonderful debut fiction novel. And where can you tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you on social media or website, any place?
Go to CherylBostrom.com, and I blog weekly and have excerpts from the book on there, and a lot of my photography and a lot of book reviews, and it's just real interactive. So you could go there. And I'm on Instagram under Watching Nature, Seeing Life. And those are my two primary platforms. Excellent. But I'm on Facebook too. Yeah.
I'm going to show the book off one more time. It's beautiful. Get it. All of you read it. You won't be sorry. All right, Cheryl, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day, and good luck as you continue to pursue your writing career.
Okay, thanks so much.